Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I'm doing my June wrap up. Cracking a Bud Light seltzer. Not sponsored, but Bud Light hit me up. Pineapple flavor. What is going on with these hard seltzers, man? Something about this, oh my god. Okay, so I have a book that's coming up in my stack that reminds me of like hard seltzers and the mystery behind them, because like what is it? Like it says it's cane sugar, water, malted rice, natural flavors. I'm a little skeptical, but they're low calorie, so I will take the risk that comes with drinking whatever this is. And they're pretty good. I like them. I am a sucker for a good White Claw hard seltzer moment. They're fun, especially for the summer. I'm hot as hell in Arizona right now, you guys. Like hot. It's hot. But without further ado, oh, and I'm wearing a beer shirt today. It is my brand to be repping beer even though I'm drinking a seltzer. Okay, first up we have Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. This is something I don't usually read. It is a queer indie horror novella. And quick sidebar, I think in one of my recent videos I said that I went viral on TikTok. And when I tell you I went viral on TikTok with this book in it, I got 971,000 views on this video. So almost 1 million views. 1 million. The levels of how afraid I am of how much I'm being perceived on TikTok is astronomical. And I also hit 14.1k followers on TikTok. Just thinking about the amount of effort I put into TikTok so far, which is close to none, versus how much effort I put into YouTube and Instagram, it's mind-boggling. TikTok, the kids really have TikTok by the neck right now. So yeah, that's fun. I don't really know how to make money on TikTok, if that's even a thing, really. I think there's like a creator fund, but I don't know anything about it. But I'm gonna try to look into it and see what that could be, because if it's this easy to get viral, I mean, I don't know. But so this book that I mentioned was a part of this video that I made on TikTok regarding 3 disturbing books. Tons of people read it because of this TikTok. Like people in the comments were saying they went and got it, and most people said they liked it. Some people were like,
that was not scary.
And I'm like, okay, good for you. This book is crazy. So for Pride Month, I wanted to read some queer horror, because it's been a while since I read some horror. And so I saw this one from Stephanie at Books in the Freezer. I followed her podcast for like a long time. I think last year I was one of the top listeners to the podcast. I like horror, even though I don't read much of it. So it's funny that I listen to that podcast and I don't really read much of what they recommend, but I just like hearing about what's out there. I don't know if that's weird, but so she did a TikTok of it, like exclusively a review of that book, and then it sounded so good, so then I bought an ebook copy and I read it in one sitting, and this shit messed me up. So basically what it is, it's an epistolary horror novel novella following these 2 women who are exchanging emails and IMs on this LGBT online like forum site. And so the main character, I forget her name, but she was posting a family heirloom that she was planning to sell. It was an apple peeler. Another woman responds to it, and they eventually start engaging in conversations about stuff. And I should say this is set in the year of 2000, which seems really important to me for this novella in terms of the ways that this relationship goes south very quickly. So they begin to engage in this BDSM relationship through these emails and IMs exchanges. What's really eerie about this novel is, I'm going to call it a novel, I'm sorry, it's a novella. What's creepy about this novella is that at the start, you know the main character, something bad has happened. And so then you get into the IMs and emails and figure out what happens from there. And so this basically is an examination of what happens when the boundaries of consent are pushed, what happens when someone manipulates another person in this kind of scenario, and the depth to which a person can succumb to longing for a person. It goes way south. This book gets very gross at times, body horror for sure. Yeah, it's a lot, but it was fun. It was a good read for me. It reminded me that I love horror so much, and I want to keep intentionally putting horror on my TBR because I always love the reading experience. I mean, I did not like the amount of grossed out and scared I felt while reading this, or just like unnerved. But yeah, it was a really interesting look at a queer relationship gone awry in 2000 over the internet. It was a cool original story that I'd never seen before. So yeah, if you like internet horror or tech horror or queer horror, I would definitely check it out. Kind of a niche book, especially for me. I usually, stick to the lit fic these days, but that was a fun one for sure. Next up, ooh, this is a good one. Okay, so I have a lot of 5-star reads this month, which was not expected. I read some heavy hitters this month. It's a lot. So lots of good recommendations in this wrap up. But first up, I have You Will Never Be Forgotten, a short story collection by Mary South. This book is so good. Okay, if you like short stories, just buy it, get it from the library. find a copy and read it. It is so good. Just from a craft perspective, aside from that, this is a collection that is very much online and about, I guess it's about the internet, but it's also about technology and kind of the growing evolution of technology and our dependence on technology and social media and the internet as a part of our daily lives, and what that looks like when pushed to the extreme, and looking at characters all usually suffering from something bleak or grappling with something going on in their lives, and the ways that technology and the internet kind of play into those struggles. So actually the synopsis for this book has a really good quick, like, one sentence summaries of what some of these stories are about. So I'll read this really quickly so you get a feel for what these stories entail. So the first one is: an architect draws questionable inspiration from her daughter's birth defect. 2, a content moderator for the world's biggest search engine spends her days culling videos of beheadings and suicides, and turns from stalking her rapist online to following him in real life. That was a really good one. Just putting that out there. At a camp for recovering internet trolls, a sensitive misfit disappears. Also really good. And then a wounded mother raises the second incarnation of her child. Brilliant. And I'll let you wonder what that means. But yeah, this story collection goes there. I would say my personal favorite story in this collection was called Frequently Asked Questions About Your Craniotomy. We follow a brain surgeon who is basically writing like what appears to be like an FAQ online about what like your brain surgery will entail, but it quickly devolves into her reflecting on her life as a brain surgeon, and it gets super bleak and sad. You know, you see a woman who is dealing with people that are being diagnosed with very traumatic, bad illnesses, and the way that she grapples with that personally. And so it's a really interesting way of using the FAQ format to then eventually look into this woman's life. I was blown away by that story. It was perfectly crafted, so good. So if there's one story to read from here, definitely read that one. I heard through the grapevine that she's writing a novel right now, and I am hyped as hell for it. Short story fans, pick this one up for sure. Dude, okay, this month has been so long. Some of these books I feel like I read like 3 months ago. Like, I don't understand. But the next book I listened to was Yearbook by Seth Rogen. I ordered this because I saw Roxane Gay. She reviewed it on Goodreads and basically said it was a lovely time. And it's been a while since I've like watched a Seth Rogen movie, but it sounded like something I wanted, just like something chill, a chill audiobook to listen to while I'm driving and stuff. Sometimes I like a celebrity memoir style book, and so I picked this one up. I would say it was kind of middle of the road for me. I didn't think it was like that funny, but I do think it's basically just a collection of him telling stories from his life, and he's a comedian, so it's just basically like storytelling from a guy that's funny. It was a good time overall. It didn't blow me away by any means. I like chuckled mostly at some stories, especially at the beginning. But yeah, if you like Seth Rogen, if you like his voice, if you're looking for like a comedic, lighthearted, just kind of chill, funny book, I would pick it up. Nothing mind-blowing or anything for me, but it was an alright time. Next up, I have a book I really, really liked. It was Everyone Knows Your Mother is a Witch by Rivka Galchen. This one just came out this month, and this was a really cool and kind of different read for me. This one is a historical fiction novel following this woman who has been accused of being a witch in the 1600s in Germany, right at the start of the 30 Years' War, and the plague is spreading basically, and so you kind of get this sense of a societal community unrest in the ways that they start pinning the accusation of witchcraft on women in this community, and the ways that our main character, Katharina, the way that she deals with it. And so one really interesting narrative device that's used here is that Katharina is illiterate, and so she is telling her story to her neighbor Simon, who is literate, and he is basically documenting what she's telling him. And so it's a really interesting way. At first I sensed that it was going to be like a touch of unreliability to the narrative, but really what it is, we get a cool look into the way the neighbor is trying to help her and the way that he believes that she is not a witch. And so throughout the book you're kind of wondering like, what's the truth here, what's going to happen to her. You learn a lot about her family, and it's kind of darkly funny throughout. Just from a pure character perspective, Katharina Kepler was really fun to read about, and the way her resiliency and her kind of bravery in the face of all of this, while she's also, you know, trying to connect with her children throughout this process, and you learn more about her marriage and everything. It's really, really good, and I loved where the story went. It's actually based on a real event that happened, but it's fictionalized. And so, yeah, it was a really fun read. Throughout the book, there's a bunch of testimonies that are being taken at the trial for Katharina, and so you hear from the perspectives of other people in the community and the ways that they're either making stuff up about her or just trying to exonerate themselves in this situation is really interesting. That's like where a lot of the comedy comes in, even though it's such a bleak situation that we're reading about in terms of this accusation. Yeah, I loved it. If that sounds good to you, it's kind of like a weird, it's a hard book to kind of synthesize into a quick review, but it was a really fun time. I really liked it. It was hard to put down, and it's pretty quick to read as well. So that sounds fun. Try it out. So this was a very random month for me. The next book I have is a mystery, a murder mystery, which Haven't read a lot recently. Yeah, I've been reading a bunch of like different things, like historical fiction, a celebrity memoir style book, queer indie horror novella, like random, but it's been a really fun month and I found some really good gems, but this one was not a gem for me. This book, it's dubbed a Japanese cult classic mystery, and what I really did like about this book is that it is based on Agatha Christie's classic And Then There Were None, a book that I've loved since I read it as like a kid or a teenager. And this is just kind of purely like plot focused. There's not much depth to it that I found. It's basically just using the premise of a bunch of characters trapped on an island together, and someone starts murdering them one by one, and you try to figure out who it is. It's purely what it is. But what's kind of cool is that the characters in this book are in a university's mystery club, so they love murder mysteries and they study the genre. So you get like a meta-analysis from the characters of like what's going on, thinking about plot points. They're all named after different classic mystery writers. But what I really did not like about this book is that it jumps back and forth from the mainland, where some people are trying to work through the mystery of this island, and then it jumps back to the island with the characters who are being killed. And I didn't really care about what was happening on the mainland. I really wanted to be engaged with the characters that were under stress. So like those parts were very boring for me. And then, I mean, you kind of have to suspend your disbelief a bit with the end of it. It's a little bit far-fetched, but I don't know. Wasn't my favorite. I don't have much to say about it. Other than that, it's like a Agatha Christie inspired murder mystery. Fun if you just want a quick little puzzle, I guess. But it's nothing that I'll really remember, so I don't know. Okay, we're entering the heavy hitter territory of the month. So next up, I read Punch Me Up to the Gods by Brian Broome. This is a memoir that I adored. It was so good. This is another one that I listened to and read at the same time. I had a advanced listening copy from Libro FM, which we love. Support your local bookstores with your audiobook purchases if you can. But this is a really beautiful memoir looking at Brian Broome's experience growing up as Black and queer in Ohio, and the very fraught relationship that his parents have and the way that impacted him growing up. And so you see him navigating queer spaces as he gets older and just grappling with his identity and trying to discover himself in the midst of all of this, in the multiple stressors that are put upon him and struggles that he faces in that experience, including, substance abuse issues, abuse from his parents, how all that plays into him, and the way that the town he grew up in Ohio was not accepting of his queer Black identity. I think from a craft perspective, this is a really well done work because he tells it in this really interesting way in which he jumps back and forth in time. So in the present, he is watching this Black father and son on a bus, and he's seeing the way that the father is treating him, silencing the son in certain ways or kind of covering up his behavior, and in the name of pushing masculinity forward, essentially. So you see Brian Broome reflecting on the dynamics he's seeing with this child, and it makes him think of his own childhood with his father and the ways that his father treated him growing up and how that's impacted him. The kid's name is Twan, and he's kind of hoping that Twan has a hopeful future, has a bright future for himself, reflecting on his own past in doing that. And I thought it was a really awesome way of doing that. And there's one really cool section in here that I won't spoil, I guess, because I thought it was really interesting when it came in. But yeah, I think from a craft perspective, it's amazing. The story is absolutely beautiful, heart-wrenching. Couldn't put it down. Yeah, if you're a memoir fan, definitely add it to your TBR. It is so good. I loved it. Okay, the next book. This book is wild, y'all. It is Something New Under the Sun by Alexandra Kleeman. This book comes out August 3rd in the US, and I loved it so much. This book took me a couple of weeks to read. There was this chaotic period where I was reading like multiple books at one time. I still am, actually. But I was like jumping around a lot, and this book was so, from a fiction perspective, it was so juicy in terms of craft, in terms of the way that she's balancing so many different components here. So before I get into it, this book is basically, I don't even know how to explain it. Okay, so we follow this man who is a novelist, and he's gone to Hollywood. He's from the East Coast. I forget where he's from. I think like Maine or Massachusetts or something. And he is working on the adaptation of his novel into a film. And in that, he's working with these people that are working on the film, but then it becomes questionable whether there actually is a film being created given their kind of odd behavior. So we get some interesting characters that way, but then there's also the star of the movie is this woman named Cassidy Carter, who is a childhood actress. Now she's older, and so basically the clear parallel to me here is like Lindsay Lohan. That was the image I had in my head reading this. And I saw in an interview that was one of the inspirations for this book was the way that she was treated basically as a childhood star into adulthood. And so she's the star of the film. He starts working with her. If you can't tell, this plot is bananas. This book is very preoccupied with thinking about climate anxiety and environmental collapse and the end of the world, basically. And so in LA and like on the west coast of the US, there's a new product out there called Water or Watt R. So water, no E, a dash there instead. And it is basically a newly created form of water. It basically has all the components of water, but naturally created water is no longer found. Companies start privatizing it and making their own version of water that becomes the primary or only really way of consuming water. Meanwhile, the novelist, his family back at home are going to this, seems to be kind of like a cult-ish style retreat in which they kind of think about the end of the world and try to reduce their carbon footprint essentially and try to live off the earth. So all of these things are playing together, right? A lot of moving parts in this novel, but it works so perfectly. You see the novelist and Cassidy, the actress, start investigating what this water is because Patrick has been drinking it while he's there, and it seems to be having a weird effect on people because they start developing this new form of dementia, or that seems to be going around in LA, and so they start to think, is there a connection to the water, or like what's going on there? And so you see all of these things kind of come to a boiling point in this book, and it's so well balanced. It kind of feels like a detective noir. It's also about climate change, really interesting character studies of what it means to be in the spotlight for your entire life in the form of Cassidy. We also get a lot of talk about conspiracy theories. So there was a TV show that Cassidy was in when she was growing up, and online, what seems to be like Reddit, there's a bunch of like conspiracy theory fanboys that are speculating about how the kid or teen show was all trying to document some hidden evil lurking thing in LA. I can go on and on about all the different plot points in this book, but in short, if you really like reading about climate change fiction, if you like something that's pushing the boundaries of fiction and just a really well executed novel that's looking at all of these things, and it's also just really propulsive and unputdownable and mysterious, and also the prose here is just like bonkers good, like so good. There's a lot of nature writing in this book necessarily to kind of drive home the points that she's trying to make about the end of the world and looking at, the internet, fame, celebrity, all within the backdrop of a world that is dying. And so it's very bleak in the form of its pre-apocalyptic vibe generally. I love this book. I want to reread it really bad because there's a lot going on. It can be kind of dense at times, but in the best way. Like it was like a fiction reader's dream for me to read that book. So yeah, loved it. Definitely add it to your list. Coming out soon, so that was a good one. Next up, another book that blew my mind. It is Assembly by Natasha Brown. Awards are on her way, my friends. This is a brilliant, very small novel, very much in the vein of the fragmentary authors, using a kind of sparse, fragmented style to tell this really excellently well done story about this woman. She's a black woman living in London, and she is successful in her career. I believe she works in finance, if I remember correctly. She's planning to go to her boyfriend's family's house to go to this party in their garden, and you see her kind of leading up to that party. You see her grappling with her identity, thinking about what it means to be a successful black woman in London and the ways that there's certain narratives that are imposed on her and the ways that she is feeling inherently needing to reject them and push away from them. A lot of this is a very scathing look at white supremacy, examining the ways in which she is trying to, in a way, push against it, but ultimately just dissect it and look at it and walk away from it. That's what Natasha Brown's doing so well here. There is a certain plot point that I don't want to go into because it carried so much of the impact for me personally when reading this book that really drove this book home for me, and I won't spoil it here, but I'll just say that there's a certain level of stakes that's added to this book that leads to so much tension that's built to the end of it, and I was just shocked and moved and gutted by this book in so many different ways. The way that she could do this in this short of a book, this is tiny. I would be shocked if this does not make the long list for the Booker or the short list. It is brilliant, in my opinion. Yeah, this one doesn't come out until September in the US. I know it's already out in the UK, so go get it if you're there, or order it from Blackwell's. I love when fiction is good, you know what I mean? It's good fiction, man. It's what we're here for. Jesus, I feel like I read a lot this month. Oh my god, why am I still talking? Okay, next up, another weird, zany book that was actually, it was a fun time. Had some problems with it though. It is A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan. This book comes out in July 13th in the US. This book on paper has everything that I like in fiction. It is dark, it is disturbing, it's about the internet, it's about millennial malaise, it is about social media, it is about toxic ass relationships, putting it all in a blender with a horror spin. It's doing a lot. This book is a lot. As CJ said, it is a romp. This is a romp to the fullest. We follow this couple, Remy and Alicia, who are obsessed with Remy's old coworker, who has become basically like a social media influencer of sorts. You see Alicia, who is very self-conscious and is treated quite poorly by Remy. Remy's an asshole. He is like fuckboy to the fullest. Very unlikable characters all throughout this book, by the way. If you like some unlikable characters like I do, they're everywhere in this book. But so we see her become complicit in Remy's obsession with Jen. It can be quite sad because you see her trying to please Remy through his obsession with her, and she then, by proxy, becomes obsessed with Jen as well. And then one day they run into Jen at the Apple store. Jen has become like a part of their sexual fantasies, constantly checking like post notifications on, always thinking about Jen. They see her at the Apple store, and then Jen ends up inviting them on a surfing trip in the Hamptons, where things go left. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. A monster is unleashed in this book. There is stalking. There is a murder, some action near the end. There's a lot going on, but it's also a really interesting look. Kind of the first half is a deep look at like social media, kind of classic themes in modern social media internet novels. But I think it does it in a really cool way in terms of rooting in horror. I like the subgenre of social media horror. I think it's really fun. But this is clearly, satirical. Things get way out there. So, it's not intended to be taken too seriously, but there's one character who is obsessed with like energies and like finding your path and listening to the vibes, like finding your true purpose. It's told in 4 parts that kind of are based on this character's perception of kind of like signs in our life that are all reaching towards the consummate result is what it's called in the book, and it gets dark. I would say that this book does feel quite long for what it's doing. I think this would have been an excellent novella or short story. I think some of the build up in terms of the kind of like obsessiveness with Jen and something like the small conversations that are had or small plot points were kind of unnecessary. Yeah, it was just a little too bloated for me, but I did think it was super fun. It was a romp, as CJ said. So yeah, I would definitely check it out. I'm not saying it's a bad book by any means. I didn't really enjoy my time with it. I would just don't go into it expecting anything too groundbreaking in terms of like the internet novel or social media. I think it is using all these things to tell a really fun, entertaining story, first and foremost. Next up, if you watched my live stream with Kieran from KD Books, in that live stream, he recommended to me the plays of Sarah Kane. He warned me going into this that it's a lot, but he also said that she is the best British playwright. And so I was very intrigued. I like a disturbing moment. And, these are plays. Oh my God, okay. On my channel, I constantly quote Trixie and Katya from on YouTube. If you watch it, I read a play. My first play.
I was in a play. My first play. My first play was called Whether You Like It or Not.
Oh my God. Okay, anyways, bear with me, y'all. So yeah, I never read plays. This is my first collection of plays that I've ever read, I think. Like Shakespeare in high school, but that's about it. And it was an interesting experience just from like a new form of fiction that I hadn't really read before. Kind of challenged my like traditional way of like reading and consuming this kind of content. So it was interesting in that regard. But I will say this book is probably the most disturbing book I've ever read. Like, strong warning going into this book if you are so inclined to read it. There's so much violence and despair and bleakness rooted in these plays, but I do, oddly enough, find that these plays are so beautiful despite that. So Sarah Kane was a British playwright who wrote these 5 plays and a 10-minute film, and she killed herself in the early 2000s, I believe. And so these were written in the late 90s and then I think 2000. The last one, 448 Psychosis, is commonly referred to as her suicide note. Reading these plays with that in mind, in terms of these plays sort of revealing her psyche and the ways that she perceives the world and the bleakness and dark thoughts that haunted her throughout her entire life, are so well reflected in these plays, and it is intended to unsettle you. It's intended to make you feel what she is feeling, and it does that so well. I will never forget these plays. They are so haunting, so in your face. I think it's described as like in your face theater. I don't know anything about theater. I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly, but I was doing some light reading on Sarah Kane, and what was interesting about these plays is that a lot of her plays are kind of left to directorial discretion and, putting on the stage what seems to be something that would be impossible to put on the stage. I won't go into any of what that could mean. I mean, there's so much going on in these plays. Yeah, this was a challenging experience for me, but at the same time, I felt so glad that I read these. She was an author that I had never heard about before, or playwright that I'd never heard about before, and I'm glad that Kieran pushed me to read this book, because I think this is one of the most original, like mind-boggling, and just a piece of fiction that I will never ever forget. I would like to see some of these on the stage, because when I was reading them, given my inexperience of reading plays, sometimes it was hard for me to figure out what was going on, or like figuring out how to picture it, how to interpret what she is trying to show through the play description and directive, basically. Particularly, there was one play called Crave in here that I just did not get whatsoever. It was like, I just didn't get it. I would like to see these plays and see kind of the difference between reading them and actually seeing them on the stage. But go watch Kieran's review of this book, because he is much more eloquent in his love and discussion of these plays, with his more significant knowledge about Sarah Kane's life. So definitely check that out as well. Last but not least, I just posted a recent reading blog of Queen of my life, Sally Rooney. I read Beautiful World, Where Are You? This was a book that I got from my friend, so the publisher did not send me this. I got very lucky in terms of getting an advanced copy of this. I'm so glad I got the chance to read it. This book is, I think, my favorite book of the year so far, saving the best for last year. This book was everything that I wanted from Rooney's third novel and more. It completely exceeded my expectations, which were very high. I was so nervous reading this, or going into it. I was like, I'm so excited for this book. Like, there's no way it's going to live up to my expectations. But it seems like Sally Rooney is tapping into so much of what I've been thinking about personally in like my reading experience over the last year and a half, I would want to say. I've been reading a lot about longing, a lot about social media, a lot about the internet, about living in our present moment, like pre-apocalyptic vibes, thinking about kind of like the end of the world and what is the seeming futility of being a human today, what this all means for me as a 25-year-old. And so the characters in this book are late 20s, early 30s. And so we follow this group of 4 characters. You see their interpersonal relationships kind of blossom. We have some friends. We have classic Sally Rooney setup in terms of having a square of characters and the ways that they all interact together and peering into their psyches. But I won't go into it too much, as I had the whole reading vlog discussing all of this. But I will say this book feels so hyper aware of itself, and Sally Rooney seems to have really thought a lot about the success of her work and the amount of discourse that has come from normal people and conversations with friends, and thinking about capitalism, the end of the world, Marxism, sexuality, beauty, biological clocks, like all of these things that many people my age are thinking about incessantly. She really taps into it here, and what I really loved as well is that she thinks about how to reflect these things in a novel. And so one of the characters here is a novelist. I can't wait to listen to some interviews with her once the book comes out, because I want to see how she went about writing this character, because it seems like a lot of Sally Rooney's seeming inner thoughts about her work is reflected through this character, which was really amazing to read. Every other chapter is a email that's told between Alice and Eileen, 2 of the characters, and it's a lot of like what I interpreted as like essayistic writing about the end of the world, all these topics that I just mentioned, about finding beauty in the world, about trying to find one's purpose, about the novel, a lot about novels and just fiction and how our present moment is reflected in contemporary Euro-American novels. And so overall, this book is so good. If you love Sally Rooney, I would be shocked if you're disappointed by this book. I loved it so much. It seems like Rooney has matured so much as a writer, and I love the questions that she's analyzing here. The last 2 chapters were so good. She does something interesting that I won't spoil, but I thought it was so well done. Yeah, this book was everything I wanted, and I'm so happy. I love that satisfying feeling of having a hyped book come through, and that's what happened. So full thoughts in my reading vlog video, but just know I loved it so much. I think it's my favorite book of the year, up there with Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler, also a very online book thinking about our present moment. So it seems like I'm thinking about that a lot, apparently. So, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and this wrap up. I hope you find some stuff that you love. I say this all the time, but if you pick something up based on my recommendation, I wholeheartedly hope that you love it. I hate recommending books to people and they end up not liking them. So I really hope these reviews helped you. So yeah, until next time, cheers.